watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Below him, Manhattan pulsed with life, oblivious to the man who had just crossed another threshold. $1 million. His first million. At 28, he had done what most people only dreamed of. The celebration was modest, just Marcus, a bottle of Dom Perignon, and the night sky. He had no one to share it with, really. His college friends had drifted away, absorbed into their own struggles. His parents had passed years ago in a car accident, leaving him with nothing but a studio apartment and a relentless hunger to prove something to the universe. He took a sip and felt the bubbles dance on his tongue. This was it, the beginning of everything. He thought about the late nights, the rejected pitches, the meals skipped to save money for his startup. Web analytics had been a gamble, a software solution for predictive market trends that nobody believed in until suddenly everyone did. The first client had been a fluke, a mid-sized investment firm desperate enough to try anything, but Marcus delivered. His algorithm predicted a market correction 3 weeks before it happened, saving them millions. Word spread, contracts followed, and now, 12 months later, he had his first million in personal earnings. He raised his glass to the city, to the future, to the empire he would build. What Marcus didn't notice was the photograph on his phone's home screen beginning to fade. It was a picture of him and his college roommate, David, arms around each other at graduation. The pixels were bleeding like watercolor in rain. By morning, the photo would be completely blank, and Marcus would have no memory of David at all. The next million came faster, 18 months of aggressive expansion, hiring a team of data scientists, securing contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Web analytics became synonymous with precision. Marcus moved into a penthouse overlooking Central Park. He bought a Tesla, then a Porsche. He dated models and attended galas where champagne flowed like water. When his account hit 2 million, he threw a party, a real one this time. The penthouse was packed with people he barely knew, but who all wanted to be near success. Music thumped through expensive speakers. Someone spilled red wine on his white carpet, and he didn't even care. This was living. Marcus stood on his balcony, surveying his kingdom. A woman whose name he'd already forgotten draped herself over his shoulder, whispering something about going to the Hamptons. He nodded absently, calculating his next move. 3 million was close, maybe 6 months away if he played it right. Inside, on a bookshelf, a framed photograph of Marcus and his mother began to yellow and crack. The glass spiderwebbed from the center, as if struck by an invisible force. By the time the party ended and the sun rose over the park, the frame would be empty except for shards of glass, and Marcus would have no recollection of the woman who had raised him. The pattern continued. Each million came with its ritual. At 3 million, Marcus rented out an entire restaurant, ordering bottles of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 4 million, he flew to Monaco, bet 50,000 on black, and won. He celebrated by buying a yacht he would use exactly twice. His team at Web Analytics grew to 50, then 100. His face appeared in Forbes, in TechCrunch, in Wall Street Journal profiles about young entrepreneurs disrupting the financial sector. Marcus Webb was a name people knew, a success story told in business schools. But something was happening that Marcus couldn't quite articulate. He would walk into his office and feel certain he'd forgotten something important. Phone calls from numbers he didn't recognize, people claiming to be old friends, asking why he'd gone silent. He'd laugh it off, blame it on being busy, and hang up feeling vaguely unsettled. His apartment, despite being filled with expensive furniture and art, felt empty. Not physically empty, but hollow, like a movie set dressed to look lived in, but lacking any real history. He'd open drawers and find nothing personal. No old letters, no childhood keepsakes, no photographs except the professional headshots his publicist insisted on. At 5 million, Marcus celebrated alone again, by choice this time. The parties had started to feel exhausting, full of people who wanted something from him. He sat in his penthouse with a bottle of Macallan 25, staring at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked successful. Tailored suit, perfect hair, the kind of watch that whispered wealth without shouting it. But the eyes staring back at him seemed unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone he used to know but couldn't quite place. His phone buzzed, a text from a number saved only as Sarah. The message read, "I miss you. I miss us. Please call me." Marcus stared at it, trying to remember who Sarah was. A client? A colleague? The name felt important, weighted with something he couldn't access. He typed a response, "Who is this?" Then deleted it. Typed, "Sorry, new phone, remind me?" Deleted that too. Finally, he just blocked the number and poured another drink. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't know, was that Sarah had been his fiancée. They'd met at a conference 4 years ago, fell in love over late-night conversations about dreams and fears, got engaged on a beach in Santorini. She had an emerald ring that Marcus had spent 2 months' salary on, back when 2 months' salary meant something different. But Sarah existed in the space between 1 million and 2 million, and that space had been erased, overwritten by spreadsheets and profit margins and the cold mathematics of success.
A larger tech conglomerate for a sum that made Marcus's earlier celebrations seem quaint. He was now worth $8 million personally, with stock options that could double that within a year. He was 32 years old and untouchable. The celebration was in Las Vegas. Private suite at the Bellagio, a poker game with venture capitalists and tech moguls, women who laughed at jokes that weren't funny because money made everything funnier. Marcus won hands he should have lost hands he should have won, and didn't care either way because the chips were just tokens, and tokens could always be replaced. At 4 in the morning, he stood on his balcony watching the fountains dance to music he couldn't hear through the glass. A man joined him, someone from the poker game, older, maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive cologne. "You're on quite a run," the man said. Marcus shrugged. "Luck and timing." "No," the man said, and something in his tone made Marcus look at him. "I've been watching you all night. You play like a man with nothing to lose." "I have everything to lose," Marcus corrected. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Do you? Tell me, Marcus Webb, what would you actually miss if it all disappeared tomorrow?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The question sat between them like a third person. What would he miss? The penthouse? The cars? The balance in his account that grew faster than he could spend it? "Exactly," the man said, as if Marcus had answered. "You've made a trade, whether you know it or not. Every rung up the ladder costs something. Most people don't notice until they reach the top and realize they climbed alone." "That's pretty philosophical for 4 in the morning," Marcus said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm just someone who climbed before you. Consider it friendly advice. Sometimes celebration is just distraction from what you're losing." The man finished his drink and went back inside, leaving Marcus alone with the fountains and an unease he couldn't name. The next day, Marcus flew back to New York and threw himself into work. The merger meant new responsibilities, a larger team, international expansion. He traveled to London, Tokyo, Dubai, staying in hotels that all looked the same, attending meetings that blurred together. His assistant, Jennifer, kept his calendar, managed his life, reminded him of appointments he'd forget otherwise. She was efficient, professional, and Marcus realized one day that he'd known her for 3 years but couldn't remember her last name or anything personal about her. Did she have kids? A husband? Hobbies? "Jennifer," he said one afternoon, standing in her doorway, "do you have children?" She looked up from her computer, surprised. "Yes, Mr. Webb, 2 daughters, Emily and Grace. You've met them." Marcus had no memory of this. He smiled anyway. "Of course. How are they?" "They're well. Emily's starting middle school this fall." Marcus nodded and retreated to his office, disturbed. He looked at his phone, scrolling through contacts. Hundreds of names, numbers, email addresses. But when he tried to picture faces, recall conversations, remember connections, there was nothing, just empty labels. He had a friend once, he thought, someone from college. They used to play basketball on weekends, argue over philosophy over cheap beer. What was his name? It started with D. David? Daniel? The memory was like trying to hold water in his hands, slipping away as soon as he grasped it. By the time Marcus hit 10 million, he'd stopped feeling much of anything. The celebration was perfunctory. A nice dinner alone at Per Se, a table by the window where he could watch people walk by and wonder if any of them were happy. His reflection in the wine glass looked older than 32. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, a hardness in his jaw. He'd recently had a medical checkup, and the doctor had mentioned his heart rate was elevated, stress markers in his blood. "You're pushing too hard," the doctor had said. "When's the last time you took a Rio vacation?" Marcus couldn't remember. He wasn't sure he'd ever taken a vacation that wasn't also a business trip in disguise. The waiter brought the check, $300 for a meal Marcus could barely remember eating. He paid with a black card that had no limit, left 100% tip because the number didn't matter, and walked out into the city night. Broadway was lit up, tourists crowding the sidewalks, street performers seeking attention and dollars. Marcus walked through them like a ghost, invisible despite his expensive suit and shoes. Nobody looked at him. Nobody saw him. He was successful, wealthy, powerful, and utterly alone. His phone buzzed. A notification from his banking app. A dividend had deposited. $47,000 just for owning the right stocks. Money making money while he slept, while he ate, while he existed. He should have felt something. Joy, satisfaction, vindication. Instead, there was just emptiness. A void where emotion should be. He wondered if this was what winning felt like, or if he'd misunderstood the game entirely. That night, in his penthouse, Marcus couldn't sleep. He wandered room to room, looking at furniture he'd bought but never chosen, art he owned but didn't understand, a home that felt like a hotel. In his bedroom closet, he found a box he didn't recognize. Inside were things that seemed familiar but alien. A baseball mitt worn soft with use, a concert ticket stub from a band he'd never heard of, a photograph of a young man standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, arms spread wide, grinning like he owned the world. The young man looked like Marcus, maybe 10 years ago, but Marcus had no memory of going to Paris, of owning a baseball mitt, of attending concerts. He stared at the photograph, trying to remember, trying to feel some connection to the person in the image. Nothing came, just static where memories should be. He put the box back, closed the closet, and took a sleeping pill. As he drifted off, he had a dream about a house by a lake, a woman laughing in a kitchen, the smell of coffee and morning light. It felt more real than anything in his waking life, and when he woke up at 3 a.m., he tried desperately to hold on to it. But it evaporated like smoke. Sold Web Analytics, but retained controlling interest in a new venture, a cryptocurrency hedge fund that made obscene returns in a market that rewarded risk and punished hesitation. His reputation was bulletproof, his portfolio diversified, his net worth climbing faster than he could track. The celebration was empty. He didn't even plan one, just noticed the number in his account one morning and felt nothing. $15 million, a fortune that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. Now it was just a number, abstract and meaningless. He was in Los Angeles for meetings, staying at the Four Seasons, when he ran into someone who claimed to know him, a woman, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a familiar warmth. "Marcus? Marcus Webb?" She approached him in the lobby, smiling but uncertain. "Yes?" He didn't recognize her. "It's me, Anna Rodriguez. We worked together at your first startup before Web Analytics took off." Marcus searched his memory and found nothing. "I'm sorry, I don't—" "We spent 6 months building the initial algorithm together. Late nights, pizza boxes, you and me and David debugging code until sunrise." She laughed at the memory. "You don't remember?" "I think you have me confused with someone else," Marcus said politely. Her smile faded. "Marcus, we were partners. You promised me equity. Then suddenly you cut me out, stopped returning my calls. I thought maybe you were just busy, but now—" She studied his face. "You really don't remember me, do you?"
"I'm sorry, I have a meeting." Marcus walked past her toward the elevators, feeling her eyes on his back. In the reflection of the polished doors, he saw her standing there, confused and hurt, before the doors closed and she vanished. Back in his suite, Marcus opened his laptop and searched his own history. Web analytics, the founding story, the early days. Articles called him a solo entrepreneur, a lone genius who'd built something from nothing. No mention of partners, collaborators, or anyone named Ana Rodriguez. But somewhere in the corners of his mind, something stirred. A memory of code on a whiteboard, two sets of hands typing on separate keyboards, someone laughing and saying, "We did it." Was that real? Or was he inventing nostalgia for a past that never existed? He called his lawyer. "I need you to look into something. Find out if I ever had a business partner named Ana Rodriguez." The lawyer called back 3 hours later. "No records of anyone by that name in any of your ventures, Marcus. Are you concerned about a lawsuit?" "No," Marcus said. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of something erased. He spent that night drinking whiskey and staring at old photographs on his computer, trying to find evidence of a life he'd lived but couldn't remember. Most of the photos were professional, headshots, event coverage, publicity stills. But buried deep in an old folder, he found personal photos that seemed wrong. A birthday party where someone had been cropped out, just an arm or shoulder visible at the edge of the frame. A Christmas dinner with an empty chair at the table, place setting still there, as if someone had vanished mid-meal. In one photo, Marcus was younger, happier, standing in what looked like a college dorm room. He was looking at something off camera, laughing at something or someone was saying. The joy in his face was so pure, so unguarded, that it hurt to look at. He tried to remember that moment, that feeling, and couldn't access it. Who had been in that room with him? What had made him laugh like that? The questions haunted him. 20 million arrived quietly, without ceremony. Marcus was 35 now, though he looked older. The stress, the travel, the emptiness had carved lines into his face that no amount of expensive skincare could erase. He started seeing a therapist, finally admitting that something was wrong, even if he couldn't articulate what. "Tell me about your childhood," the therapist said during their first session. Marcus opened his mouth and realized he couldn't, not because the memories were painful, but because they weren't there. He could recall facts: born in Chicago, parents died when he was 23, studied computer science, but there was no emotional texture, no specific moments, no stories. "I had a normal childhood," he said finally. "What does normal mean to you?" "I don't know. School, friends, the usual things." "Can you tell me about your friends?" Marcus tried. He could picture a generic group of children playing, but no faces, no names, no specific friendships. It was like remembering a movie he'd seen rather than a life he'd lived. "I had friends," he said, defensive now. "I was a normal kid." The therapist made a note. "What about your parents? What are your strongest memories of them?" Nothing. A void where love should be. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. "I remember them," he insisted. "They were good parents. They supported me." "I'm not questioning that. I'm just asking for a specific memory. A birthday, a holiday, a conversation, something that stands out." Marcus searched desperately and found only absence. He could see a woman's face, vaguely maternal, but it was like looking at a stranger's photograph. No connection, no recognition, no grief, even though he'd been told they died. Had he grieved? He must have. You don't lose your parents without grieving. But he couldn't remember crying, couldn't remember the funeral, couldn't remember anything except the abstract knowledge that they were gone. "I need to go," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "This was a mistake." He never went back to therapy. Instead, he worked harder, made more money, celebrated each milestone with increasing desperation. 25 million, 30 million, numbers that should have meant freedom but felt like chains. His physical health deteriorated. He stopped eating regularly, surviving on coffee and ambition. He stopped exercising, his expensive gym membership going unused. He stopped sleeping well, plagued by dreams of places he'd never been and people he'd never met, all of them calling his name, asking why he had forgotten them. One night, drunk and alone in his penthouse, Marcus looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, successful, empty. "What did I trade?" he asked the reflection. "What did I give up?" The reflection had no answer, just stared back with the same desperate confusion. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it without thinking. "Marcus Webb?" An older voice, unfamiliar. "Yes?" "You don't know me, but I'm calling about your father. I was his best friend for 30 years. I just wanted to say I'm sorry I couldn't make it to his funeral. I was overseas, but I've been thinking about him lately and about you. How are you doing, son?" Marcus froze. "I think you have the wrong number." "No, this is Marcus Webb, isn't it? John Webb's son? I used to take you fishing when you were a kid. You called me Uncle Ray." "I don't know you," Marcus said, and hung up. But the phone call haunted him. Uncle Ray. The name felt important, weighty. He tried to remember fishing, tried to remember an older man teaching him to cast a line, and couldn't. How much of his life had been erased? How many people had he loved and lost without even knowing they were gone?
Climbed, and Marcus felt himself disappearing with each milestone. He looked at his calendar and saw meetings with people whose names meant nothing. He looked at his bank account and saw money that provided no comfort. He looked at his life and saw a stranger's accomplishments. The celebrations had stopped entirely. What was there to celebrate? Each million was another piece of himself vanished, another connection severed, another memory erased. He was successful beyond measure and utterly, completely alone. He tried to find people from his past, hired a private investigator to track down college classmates, co-workers from early jobs, anyone who might remember who he used to be. The investigator came back with names and addresses, but when Marcus reached out, nobody remembered him the way he hoped they would. "We had a class together, I think," one person said on the phone, "but I don't really remember you. Sorry." "You worked at my company," Marcus told another. "For 2 years. We had lunch every day." "I think you're mistaken. I've never worked at Webb Analytics." It was as if he'd been erased from their lives as thoroughly as they'd been erased from his. Not just forgotten, but removed, edited out of the shared story of their lives. Marcus started investigating his own past like a detective solving a case. He searched through old emails, finding messages to people he didn't recognize about plans he didn't remember making. He found lease agreements for apartments he'd apparently lived in but had no recollection of. He found receipts for purchases that made no sense. A dog bed, though he'd never owned a dog. Season tickets to the opera, though he'd never been. A wedding gift registry, though he'd never married. Every clue led to more questions, and every question led to emptiness. One day, going through boxes in storage, Marcus found a journal. His handwriting, his words, but the life described was foreign to him. Entries about falling in love, about fear and hope, about dreams that had nothing to do with money or success. One entry, dated 5 years ago, read, "Sarah said yes, I'm getting married. I thought making money would make me happy, but this is what happiness actually feels like. Everything else was just noise." Marcus stared at the entry, trying to summon any memory of Sarah, of a proposal, of happiness. Nothing came, just the ink on the page, evidence of a life he'd lived and lost. He kept reading, watching himself fall in love, plan a future, dream of children and a house with a yard. Then the entries changed, became shorter, more focused on work. The wedding was postponed, then postponed again. Then Sarah was gone, and the entries were all about web analytics, about clients and contracts, and the first million. The last entry, written in his own hand but feeling like a stranger's words, said, "Made my first million today. It's finally happening. Everything I sacrificed was worth it." Marcus closed the journal and wept, finally, for everything he'd lost without knowing he was losing it. He was $55 million rich and couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. The revelation came during a board meeting. Marcus was presenting quarterly projections when he suddenly couldn't remember why he was there. Not just the details of the meeting, but the purpose of it all. Making money to make more money to make more money. An infinite loop with no exit, no destination, no point. He stopped mid-sentence, looking at the faces around the table. Executives, board members, people whose approval had once meant everything. He couldn't remember any of their names. "Mr. Webb?" someone prompted. "Why are we doing this?" Marcus asked. "Excuse me? Why are we doing any of this? What's the point?" Uncomfortable silence. Someone cleared their throat. "Mr. Webb, perhaps we should take a break." "I've made $55 million, Marcus continued, voice rising. "I've built companies, disrupted markets, appeared on magazine covers. I've done everything I set out to do, and I can't remember why I wanted it. I can't remember who I was before I started wanting it. I can't remember anything except the money and the work and the endless celebration of numbers that don't mean anything." He stood up, knocking his chair backward. "I had a life. I had people. I had a woman who wanted to marry me. I had friends who knew my name. I had parents who loved me. And I traded all of it for this." He gestured at the conference room, at the skyline beyond the windows, at the empire he'd built. "For this emptiness." He walked out of the meeting, out of the building, into the street. He walked for hours, through neighborhoods he'd forgotten existed, past restaurants and shops and parks where people lived actual lives with actual meaning. He ended up at a high school basketball court where kids were playing. Marcus watched them, saw the easy friendship, the laughter, the way they knew each other's moves without speaking. He tried to remember being that young, having friends like that, and couldn't. One of the kids, maybe 16, wearing a worn jersey, missed a shot, and his friend slapped him on the back, saying something that made them both laugh. The gesture was so casual, so natural, so full of real connection that Marcus felt something break inside him. He pulled out his phone and called his financial advisor. "I want to liquidate everything," Marcus said. "I'm sorry, what?" "Sell it all. The stocks, the bonds, the real estate, all of it. Turn it into cash." "Mr. Webb, that's not advisable. The tax implications alone." "I don't care. Do it." It took 3 months to untangle his empire, to convert his success back into simple currency. Lawyers warned him, accountants begged him to reconsider. Business partners threatened lawsuits. Marcus didn't care. He was dismantling the machine that had consumed his life, piece by piece. When it was done, he had $60 million in liquid assets and no idea what to do with it. He started by trying to give it away. He hired investigators to find the people he'd erased from his life, people who might remember him even if he couldn't remember them. Anna Rodriguez received a check for $10 million with a note that said, "I'm sorry." She cashed it and never responded. He found Sarah through old records, discovered she'd married someone else, had 2 children, lived in Seattle. He sent her $5 million with a note, "You deserved better than what I became. I hope you're happy." She donated it all to charity and blocked his number. He found Uncle Ray in a nursing home, dying of cancer. Marcus sat with him, listened to stories about his father, about fishing trips and birthdays and a childhood Marcus couldn't remember. Ray died 3 weeks later, and Marcus paid for the funeral and cried for a man he'd loved but forgotten. He gave money to every person who claimed to know him, every name that appeared in his old journals and emails, every ghost of his former life. The money flowed out as fast as it had flowed in, and with each check he wrote, he hoped to feel something. Relief, maybe. Redemption. But the memories didn't come back. The connections weren't restored. The life he'd traded away stayed gone, and the money he'd earned in its place proved worthless in buying it back. At 50 years old, Marcus Webb found himself with $5 million left. No career, no family, no friends, no past, and a future that stretched before him like a desert. He sold his penthouse, bought a small apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew his name. He started taking walks every day, sitting in parks, watching people live their lives. He volunteered at a soup kitchen, not for recognition, but because the work was simple and real. Slowly, quietly, he began to rebuild a life from nothing. Not the life he'd lost, that was gone forever, but something new, something smaller, something that didn't demand celebration because it didn't need validation. He learned his neighbors' names. He adopted a dog from a shelter. He took a cooking class and was terrible at it, but enjoyed the failure. He read books that had nothing to do with business, watched movies that made him cry, listened to music that stirred something in his hollow chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it wasn't emptiness either. It was the beginning of something, tentative and fragile. One day, sitting in a coffee shop, Marcus struck up a conversation with a woman reading the same book he'd just finished. They talked for an hour about literature and life and the strange ways people change. When she left, she smiled and said, "Maybe I'll see you here again." "I'd like that," Marcus said, and meant it. That night he looked at his reflection and saw something familiar. Not the young man from the photograph, not the desperate executive in the expensive suit, but someone in between, someone who was learning slowly what it meant to be human again. He thought about celebration, about all those milestones he'd marked alone, drinking expensive champagne to honor numbers that didn't matter. He thought about what that man at the poker game had said. You play like a man with nothing to lose. He'd been right in a way Marcus hadn't understood at the time. Every million had cost him something irreplaceable, something he'd only noticed was gone